Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we are talking to a person from New Zealand who's now out in Midwest USA. Just a quick overview, and I probably won't get it all right. I'm going from memory here, but we'll talk about some of these details. 3 Hall of Fames, had a year basically unbeatable on the planet. Silver and gold in the Commonwealth Games, 3 different events and 3 different Olympics. OBE, all the honors there are. Barefoot runner before Zola Bud got shoes too, all this stuff. Today, welcome on the podcast, the very engaging Anne Audain. Hi, Anne.
Hey there, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thanks, I'm great, Anne. Let's talk about your early life and the beginning of your competition. It's well known, I'll just say for people, you can read Anne's book, you can watch the movie about Anne, you can hear her speak many times. So we'll cover some things. Maybe there'll be some new insights into those things, and we'll cover the wonderful career. Let's talk about your earliest efforts at competing and running and when you became an athlete.
I was born with bone deformities of both my feet, and I could not walk correctly through my early years. The doctors didn't really have a name for what the issue was, but I would not go forward on the front part of my feet. I shuffled along on my heels, and the doctors in New Zealand said they weren't going to try and do surgery. They wanted to see how it actually progressed as I grew older, but they didn't want to do any serious surgery until I was in my teens so that my bones were strong enough to handle the surgery and recover from the surgery. So when I was 13 years old, I went into hospital for the surgery, and all I promised my mum and dad was that we just hope that we can help her to walk better, because the bone deformities were preventing me from wearing normal shoes. Fortunately, in New Zealand, the climate allowed me to go barefoot as much as I wanted to. I was prevented from doing a whole bunch of sports. I certainly did not run and walked very awkwardly, and it was pretty painful too. So when they told my parents it was time to do the surgery, all they said was, we just hope that we can help her to walk better.
Right after the surgery, you had some unusual footwear that they gave you.
That was after the surgery. I had plaster casts up to my knees on both legs, covering my feet. Because I didn't have the heel-toe motion of walking, they wanted me to learn that immediately. Their concern was that I had got along on my heel up until that point, that when the casts came off, even though my feet were fixed as far as they were concerned, that my memory would just put me back on my heels and I would be too scared to go forward. Their idea was to create this boot. And I jokingly say, I think I'm the first one that had these magic boots that everybody gets these days when they got feet issues. But it was a black leather boot. And on the bottom of that black leather boot, they had a wooden rocker like a rocking horse. So I didn't leave that hospital on crutches or in a wheelchair. I walked out of that hospital on those boots. Now, remembering I've just had surgery, the stitches haven't been taken out yet, and they were forcing me forward on that rocker immediately. And as painful as that was, and I hated them with all my passion, it was genius. Because when the casts came off, I had perfect looking feet, and I found it immediately easier to be up on my toes. I swear they gave me the running style that I ended up having. 1 year after that, going through rehab and everything, I told my parents that I wanted to join the local track and field club. And I did, and I was 14.
How did the other kids treat you?
Prior to my surgery,
Yeah.
teasing, obviously, bullying. At one point, I almost lost sight of one eye because they pushed me. They thought it was fun to shove me along the seat when we were all having lunch. I ended up falling on the concrete water fountain. I didn't lose my sight, but I still have a scar to prove that it happened. But I was an adopted child. And my mum and dad, particularly my dad, just encouraged me to do anything I could possibly want to do. He taught me about all sports, rugby, cricket, horse racing. And their comment was that those kids aren't ever going to be your good friends. Just don't worry about it. You're going to get your feet fixed. We jokingly say years later, all those kids I went to school with that teased and laughed at me all first in line to say they were my best friends after I got a gold medal.
Yeah, it's funny how memory works. Yeah.
Mm.
Let's explain to people how New Zealand is different than some, for example, the States with the running clubs.
All sport in New Zealand is not as strongly administered by the school systems as they are here in the United States. So every sport in New Zealand has a local club, whether it's athletics, tennis, swimming, cricket, rugby, all of them. You've got the big city of Auckland that where I grew up in, totally surrounded by all these suburbs, and every single one of those suburbs had an athletic club. Mine was the Otahu Athletic Club. It's also family oriented. It's family run just by the citizens, the local citizens, totally amateur and volunteer oriented. And so this club, the other thing is that everybody from the age of 5 to 95 can become a club member. When you join, you've got your little niche of your age group, but club night was a Wednesday night. And of course, you're talking back in the 70s, the whole family would turn up with their dinners, packed dinners. Everybody would take part in the shot put and the biscuit and the running. The little ones would go first, and then the middle would administer to the little ones, and then the middle ages would go next, and the parents would administer those. And the parents would all get to do whatever they wanted to do, and the kids would administer that. It was such a big family affair. In that respect, it was just so social and so much fun. You did have the competitions if you were good enough. I think the blessing I had was there were no rules that told me as a 14-year-old that I couldn't go and compete against the adults. So I could choose if I wanted to go and race the adults, I could go do that and nobody would stop me.
As a 14-year-old female in competitions and outside the club, certainly there were limitations on your distance. How far could you run in your first club events?
At 14, the longest was 200 meters. At 16, it was 400 meters. That said, though, when I chose at age 15 to go and run an Auckland Championship 800 meters, I was not stopped. So I could make that choice myself. But in terms of what was available to me at those ages, it was 200 and 400 meters. I made the choice. Actually, it was a neighbor that convinced me to go and run in the 800 meters in the senior women's Auckland Championships. And I finished third. And that's when my first coach took notice.
Hey, let's talk about finding a coach and a manager and those kind of things, because in a club, it's a smaller surrounding area pool. How, and so the coaching is depending on what's in your club, but it is a national thing that everybody has clubs. Who was your first coach?
My first coach was Gordon Perry, who was a British athlete. He was Olympic silver medalist in Melbourne in 56. He had immigrated to New Zealand and he had approached the Otahu Club to be a coach there. This is when everything is amateur, but he managed to convince them that they needed to pay him $1,000 a year to be a coach. But he wanted to coach everybody that turned up to be coached. He had seen me run in that 800-meter race and contacted my parents and said, I would like to coach her. The club nights were Wednesday night, but coaching nights were Tuesdays and Thursdays. Saturdays, you could have interclub competition. We would go and compete against another club. And Sundays, he would pack us all up, any of us who wanted to go, those who had cars and drove, he would take us to a forest and we would do a little bit of a longer run. He was quite a character. I was 14 years of age, so I'd been raised to respect my adults, and I called him Mr. Perry and yes, sir, and so forth. But he was quite something, and he was a law unto himself. He certainly alienated all the parents very quickly.
What was his vision for you? When did your vision expand with that initial big success? How far did you look forward?
I don't know. My first headline that was written in the New Zealand paper was when I was 14. And the headline basically said, "Girl runner could prove to be great." And that was an interview with him. So I had no idea. I just was grateful to be out there with everybody else. I had no clue. Now, I will say that the competitive side in me was there. And I have no idea because I had no psychological anything, no doctor telling me what to do or be coached in terms of sports psychology or anything like that. That part was there. I just wanted to compete and I wanted to win. It was there immediately. So that made it, I think, quick progress, to be honest, that I just wasn't scared to compete right from the beginning.
What about the shoes and things like that? Did Coach Peary get that stuff? How did you move up into actual proper stuff? Were you wearing good running spikes that first Auckland race?
No, first of all, at that point, all the club tracks were grass. So I'd been running barefoot and I ran cross country barefoot. 800-meter race, it was a cinder track. So I had to find something. And my mum took me to the equivalent of a local Kmart Target store, and I just got a pair of canvas sneakers, which was actually not very productive to run on gravel. Still managed to do it, but you didn't get any grip or anything. Then Gordon found a pair of old spikes they were so old, the spikes were in the shoes permanently. They weren't the ones where you could screw it. And these spikes, they were too long. They were fine for grass, but for that cinder track, they were too long. That made a little painful too, but they were not so bad for cross country. But then he traveled to Europe almost every year, and he would go over there and he would do some orienteering. And the orienteering in Europe had some shoes that's old. They were like maybe what soccer boots look like, where they had the little plastic sprigs on the bottom. So they weren't spikes. He bought those home, and I started running in those when I raced cross country. But as much as I could on the grass track, I still went barefoot.
Didn't you get involved in orienteering at high
Yes.
level too?
Yes, he encouraged me to start orienteering, and I eventually was Australasian champion, and I was only 18 years old. I did it for about a year, maybe a little longer, but it wasn't conducive. Couldn't do both because you were risking injury, tripping over everything in the forest. It wasn't conducive to being healthy, but I was pretty good at it and I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty cool, but I couldn't do both.
Was there traveling outside of New Zealand for that Australasian championship?
No, the Australians came to New Zealand. My first trip out of New Zealand, I actually qualified for the 72 Olympic Games when they were going to put the 1,500 meters in for women for the first time. I got second in our national senior 1,500 meter championship. Barely. I was right there. I ran the qualifying time and they thought, we'll send her to the Olympic Games. It would be the first time they'd sent a female in that distance, well, obviously. They chose me, but with 3 weeks to go, they pulled me out of the team because New Zealand can't afford to send a full team in any particular sport just because of finances. And so they just replaced me with a male athlete. And as disappointing as that was, it was really probably the correct thing because in Munich, with the massacre of the Israeli athletes, the New Zealand team was housed on the same floor. So many of the New Zealand team witnessed a great deal of what went on. I probably wouldn't have handled that very well as a 16-year-old.
I didn't realize they were on the same floor. Yeah, I talked with Dave Waddle, just was on here and talked about his experience, and he raced before the massacre. But people in his room, the marathon team was there getting ready for their race during it. Yeah. Did you watch those Olympic different time zone and things? Were you watching your world of running?
No, we didn't have a TV. Dad, like I said, raised me on sport. We would listening to the radio, and we'd listen to Muhammad Ali's matches, and we'd listen to we'd listen to all the soccer matches in England, rugby, the All Blacks. So anything we did was on the radio. And I don't think the Olympics were on the radio.
Let's talk about the rest of the 70s then. This could be hours or days long to cover your whole career, but what are the highlights of the 70s of things that you saw changing as you were going to emerge on the world scene?
I first represented New Zealand in the World Cross Country Championships in 73. I was 17 years old and I finished ninth in the senior race. So the travel that we got to do out of New Zealand, because it's opposite seasons, we would have to leave New Zealand for 4 to 6 weeks to be able to go and acclimatize to Europe. So you're leaving in New Zealand summer to go and race winter cross country in Europe. Not to mention back then, there's a long trip. You're talking 40, 50 hours of travel where you're hopping. You might stay on the same plane, but you just stop and refuel and stop and refuel. It was exhausting, with also the era where there was smoking sections in the plane. So by the time you'd been on a 40 hours, you were smoking. So we would all arrive just feeling awful. It really would take 2 or 3 days to recover from that trip. Hence why we went so far advanced. Then what we would do is race cross country and some cross country races like that. First one, we raced in the English cross country championships. Then we went on to France and raced in the French cross country championships. Those federations would let us in to compete. We couldn't take the prizes, but at least we could start getting our feet wet. That was my first trip. Just all the travel and just out in New Zealand at 17 years of age. I remember coming home and sitting around the dinner table with mum and dad, and they go, "You've really changed." And I said, "If you'd seen half of what I'd seen, you would have changed too." Because the older guys in the team, they had a 17-year-old. Oh, they just thought it was cool to take me out to the light districts and show me the world. So I never told my mum I did that. I said, "Yeah, if you'd seen what I'd seen, you would have changed too." So that was at a point where, okay, if all I was going to get out of my running was world travel at a young age, that was going to be great. 74 was the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I ran the 1500 meters. I was 18 years old. I finished sixth in the final. 75, I went to another world cross country in Morocco. The New Zealand men won the world championship and the New Zealand women's team was second. 76, I went to the Montreal Olympic Games in the 800 and 1500 meters and didn't even get past the first rounds, running a New Zealand record in the 1500 meters and was last in the heats of the 800 meters. That was a wake-up call. 77 was another world cross country. I finished ninth in Düsseldorf, Germany. It was 78. 78, I got hit by a car out training. So it caused a really bad ankle injury. So I didn't get to go to the 78 Commonwealth Games in Canada. Then 79, another world cross country, this time in Limerick Island. I was 14th. So that was the 70s.
Yeah. Oh, let's just talk about other things that were happening across that span. One is the other female athletes that you were encountering and getting to know. How did they react to you when you showed up at 17? And were you getting to see some of the same people over this time? And
Yeah.
then what about your coaching across that whole span, your relationship with Gordon Perry?
Those of us competing in the 70s on the women's side were competing against the Eastern Bloc women who had since been proven to be drugged out of their minds. So you definitely saw some women that did not look like women. A lot of the times after events, you were showering in a very communal area, and then you just saw things, you just, oh my Lord, like what is going on with them? So there was that you had to deal with. You can quit because you know you're competing against cheats, or you can just keep doing what you want to do and not let it become part of your being. In terms of Gordon and his coaching, I think the difference between the two coaches I had, and then because of the success I had with my second coach, Gordon never had a plan. It was all about him. We would turn up each day to train and we didn't know what on earth he was doing. And if he was having a bad day, he'd almost try and kill us. Then he'd try and put 3 hard days together in a row. And so there was never a plan. Having had the 11 years I had with my second coach, I don't know how I survived or even did as well as what I did under Gordon. And I think it was just sheer determination, a lot of the times, to prove him completely wrong. But in the end, he did me in and I quit sport because I just couldn't deal with him anymore. I mean, he just was going nuts and taking it out on us. So many of the athletes that he'd been coaching left him. And I ended up being one of the last to stay with him. And he did me in too. And so I quit. The other reason was because of the 1980 boycott. I really didn't see any point. What I went through with him and then the boycotts, saw no reason to continue in the sport. So I quit probably about August, September of 1980, completely quit the sport.
You came back pretty strong not long after that. Maybe the most amazing year that anyone's had. You did an extensive amount of road running. How did that transition back come?
At the end of 1980, I was at rock bottom. I just completely quit running. So I put on weight. Now, obviously, saying you put on weight as a skinny distance athlete wouldn't make sense to other people, but it was too much weight to be trying to run. Anyway, a person suggested that I had such a talent and why am I wasting my talent? And there's got to be a way and got to try. And it was suggested that I ask John Davies, who was an Olympic silver medalist in Tokyo behind Peter Snell, who won gold for New Zealand, and asked him because he'd been coaching athletes that I'd been competing against. He coached Dick Quack to a world 5,000 meter record. I knew John as just a very nice person who would always talk to me about my running and congratulate me when I'd done well. So I asked him if he would consider coaching me. And it took him a while because, in his words, he knew what baggage I was coming with, that Gordon was going to be an obstacle for us because Gordon was not letting me go. He was practically stalking me. So John knew that I was coming with baggage. But he said yes, and I started training with him. And the first day, because Gordon had never let me run over an hour. John says to me, if you're going to come and train with me, you have to run at least an hour and a half on Sundays. He took me up to the Woodhill Forest and we parked the car at a gate. He'd figured out a loop and he said, we're going to run this and you're not going to stop. And so we got towards the end and it was an uphill climb to where the car was. He's running behind me with his hand on my back, just pushing me up that hill. Well, prove to you, you can run an hour and a half. I had nowhere to go but up with him. And just after, I think it was only about 6 weeks, I slipped into 6th place at our World Cross Country Team trials to go to Madrid, Spain in 81. I was still really out of shape, but I made the team. At that point, I thought, he's proving to me I'm really improving very quickly. So I went over there. I forget where I finished. I don't think I was in the top 20. I think I was second New Zealand at home. So I'd still was 6th in making the team, but I was second. Rod Dixon was in that team. And Dick Quacks had already gone over to the United States and won the Nike Marathon in Eugene and was doing a little bit of work for Nike. Rod Dixon had been over here and running some road races. And he's in Madrid with me. He said, what are you going to do now? I said, I don't know. I'm going back to New Zealand and where I'm going to I was teaching. I had a 4-year teaching career at that point. He said, you got to go to the States. He said, you got to go and run those road races. For all the years that I'd traveled with those guys, I'd gone out on runs with them. They knew I was pretty tough. He just said to me, those distances are made for you. John got in touch with Dick and said, Annie's considering going to the United States. And Dick says, I'll try and get her into some races. And of course, this is so new, particularly on the women's side. so absolutely new and opening up for women in terms of the 5,000 and the 10,000, 5K, 10K, 10 miles marathon. So Dick got me into a race in New Orleans, the Crescent City Classic 10K. Now remember, I've never run a 10K, raced a 10. I arrive in New Orleans and I get picked up by the race director in a limo and get taken to a hotel and put in a really fancy room that I've never been in ever. I'm like, oh my goodness, who do they think I am? They said, we got a press conference downstairs at say 5, 6 o'clock, and we'd like you to attend. I go down to the press conference and I'm just sitting in the audience, and they go, oh no, you have to be up on with the other athletes. Now at that point, the other athletes are Frank Shorter, Bill Rogers, Jeff Galloway, Patty Catalano, Joan Benoit Samuelson, Jackie Garreau from Canada, Margaret Gross from the United States, and me. I'm up there and I'm on the end. And they start at the other end of the seating. They start asking everybody about what they think they're going to do the next day. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what had Dick said? So they come to me and they go, you've got a really fast time in the 10K. What do you think you're going to be able to do tomorrow? I said, oh, I think I'm going to run my best time, which is what it was going to be, because it was the first time I'd ever run the 10K, so I wasn't lying. And I did. The next day I finished third and ran 33 minutes and 18 seconds for my first ever 10K, which shocked everybody. Patty ran an American record of 32:48, and Joni did just under 33 minutes, and I was 33:18. Jeff Galloway and his wife were traveling on a train back to their home in Atlanta and invited me to be able to come and stay with them for a couple of weeks, which was just so nice. They told me about what was going on in the United States. Then they put me in touch with Cree Kelly in Denver, who was trying to, everyone was trying to get the road racing built. Dick Quetz got me a place to stay in Eugene, Oregon, so I went there for a few weeks. Dick got me into Bloomsday, the big 12K Bloomsday race in Spokane, and I won. That's the first American road race I won. Then I won a women's 10K in Eugene, which got me a free air ticket to the big women's race in Central Park in New York. Then Cree got me a British couple in Denver to house me, to take me in so everybody was just wonderful, just absolutely wonderful. And I'm just out there just doing everything I'd ever dreamed of. But of course it was all amateur. I was getting a little bit of money under the table, which was helping me pay my way, but it was strictly amateur.
At this point, you had left New Zealand behind a little bit. What did you think was going to happen? How long was this ride going to go? And there weren't many women that had a long career yet, because women hadn't been involved in the sport and been able to afford it.
No, I had no idea. I actually had no idea. My ex-husband wanted to go to England and work in England, and so if it didn't work out in the United States, I would have been heading to England and found any job that I could and maybe running some local stuff in England. But things had failed in the United States. That's where I would have ended up, but they didn't.
You were in the era of a couple other great New Zealand female runners. Lorraine Moeller was out in a different part of Colorado then. Maybe was she in Boulder?
Yeah.
What was your relationship with her at the same time when you guys were running 800, 1500 in New Zealand? How was that rivalry and friendship developing?
I think it was more a rivalry, but also when she came to the United States, she leaned more towards the marathon, as did Ellison Rowe. So in 1981, Lorraine had already won the Avon Marathon in England, I think, and she had won Grandma's.
Yeah, in Minnesota.
Both her and Ellison came here and leaned towards the marathon, because Ellison won Boston in 81. So in that respect, I didn't want to run a marathon. So that kept us apart. So when we first came together, in the United States was at the Cascade Runoff in June of 81 when the sport turned professional. And we finished first, second, and third.
Yeah, that was a big deal. What do you remember before that happening of the buildup to this might be the barrier breaker?
I truly was putting my trust in a lot of the new people that I'd met. Dick had got me some Nike shoes and so forth, so I definitely had the allegiance key. Then Cree was involved with Jeff Galloway and all the folks that were talking about doing this push. But I had no say. I'm just a 25-year-old from New Zealand just looking for opportunity. So you heard about the Cascade Runoff, and Cree said to me, "You want to go?" I said, "Sure, I'll take the stand." Part of that was also because I was running out of money. So I figured if I finished fifth or sixth, I'd earn a bit more money to be able to stay in the United States a bit longer. So I went out there and we all met the night before in a hotel and got told the consequences if we accepted that check the next day. And we had to sign a document to say if we were going to take the check. Now, a lot of people didn't want to, right? They were going to race, but they weren't going to take the money because the penalty was going to be a lifetime ban from the sport. And so I'm like, I was all in because I'd traveled so much in Europe and seen all the men earning so much money under the table in Europe. I only wanted the same opportunity. You had so many American race directors that were tired of the amateurism and the under the table payments, and they wanted it above board too. So you had a lot of support with the race directors. You had this group that were really pushing for it. You had the backing of Phil Knight and Nike, who put up the $50,000. I didn't really see any harm because I might as well take the chance because I didn't consider I had a future in New Zealand. So I might as well take the chance. So I ended up winning though, and I won $10,000.
Yeah, and New Zealand decided you weren't going to have a future in New Zealand after that.
Yeah, they sure did. But I won $10,000 and I was in a lot of trouble because I was only here on a visitor's visa. So it's illegal to earn any money on a visitor's visa.
Oh, I didn't know about that part. Wow.
So I'm in trouble with the immigration folks, and you've got to deal with taxes, and then you got to start dealing with the New Zealand tax folks. What was so amazing when I think about it is there's all this here in the United States, all this immigration shit going on right now. What was amazing was New Zealand had a dual agreement with the United States on a tax situation. So I, right at that point, elected to pay American taxes. So to this day, from June of 1981, I have paid American taxes.
All of them the rest of your life, no matter where you go. Yeah, I'm American too. And
Yeah. Then immediately got banned by the New Zealand Association. However, the American race directors just ignored it. 3 days after the Cascade, I'm down in Atlanta, Georgia at the Peachtree race. At that point, I signed my first deal with Nike. We wrote it on a napkin at an ice cream store on Peachtree Boulevard. And it was for $400 a month and obviously shoes and clothing. I've won $10,000. Now I'm getting $400 a month. Oh, and travel to races. And so at that point, there's no going back as far as I'm concerned, because that's enough for me to afford to keep on going. I ran Peachtree, and then the next race I ran, forget which one it was that I won, but that put me on that spell where I ran 21 races in a row and won every single one. But at the end of 1981, I practically got deported. Got told to go back to New Zealand and go to the American embassy and not come back to the United States until I had the right visa to be able to come back here and earn money through running. So I went back to New Zealand and was told I wasn't welcome at a running track. John, my coach, says, you've got to have a reason to be out training every day while you're here. He says, I know you can't race, but you've got to have a reason. He says, why don't we attempt to break the world 5,000 meter record? And I said, what? You got to be kidding. I can't do that, because I'd watched Greta Weiss attempt it and not get it. She's like way up ahead of me. And he's telling me that I can do it when she couldn't? Yep. Think you can, Annie, if you just do what I say and follow it. And you can't do anything else. You've got to have a reason to be out there training, and you'll get your visa and you'll be going back to the United States. Okay. In March of 82, I'm still a band athlete, and Lorraine's still a band athlete. You have to have 4 people in a race to get a record. We couldn't do it at a track meet, so you had to set up a special event. You got to have 4 in the race. Now, Lorraine and I are fine, but the other 2 have to choose the repercussions of racing against band athletes.
The contamination.
Yeah, yeah. The other's Barbara Moore, who grew up with me in the same street in New Zealand. So anyway, so we set off, and I broke the world 5,000 meter record in the first time that I had raced 5,000 meters, only by a second. Then the powers that be, oh, you can't have it because you're a band athlete. So, okay, no world record plaque, but I knew I'd done it. Then I head up here to the United States, and in 1982, I won every single race and broke the course record in every single race I ran. Then I got a bigger Nike contract. That's when John said to me he wanted me to come back and run in the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane in October of 82 in the 3,000 meters. And I said I didn't want to do it. He kept pestering me and saying you should do it for your country and do it for your family, your parents. Finally, I said to him, if you can prove to me through your coaching that I can still run all the American races I'm committed to and yet be ready to run a 3,000 meters. And he goes, sure. And I said, then there's one other thing, John, I'm still banned. They're not going to let me run. And he says, oh, I've heard a rumor that it's going to be opened up. If you come to Brisbane, the ban's going to be lifted in time for you to race. But I still flew all the way to Australia, not knowing if that was going to happen. But a week before, they lifted the ban and they presented me with my world record plaque.
Yeah. The unofficial story goes that there was panic. The New Zealand athletic management is saying we could win a gold medal, and we would get blamed for stopping that. Was there lawyers involved, or did it just disappear as far as?
I think with regards to the Americans, there were lawyers involved, and the Americans' ban got lifted pretty quickly. I don't know exactly how. I know John was instrumental in working behind the scenes. I also think it had gone so far that the international, was the International Amateur Athletic Federation, that they realized that they just had a real issue on their hands, that they had to do something. Of course, there was the so-called trust fund that we were all supposed to put our money into. And the funny thing is I never put mine into anywhere because New Zealand thought I was putting it into the American system. Americans thought I was putting it into the New Zealand system, and I was just investing it.
Right. So you're getting the shoes and equipment from Nike and travel, fully sponsored. What was your approach to the shoes? Were they sending you experimental shoes? Were you picking what you wanted? Did they matter much to you?
They did matter a lot to me. I found one that I really liked. It was called the American Eagle. I think it was red, white, and blue. Now that I think about it, nothing to it, because that's what I preferred, was to run in the nearest thing possible to bare feet. And that's what the doctors had told me. I wanted my feet to stay healthy and strong, to run as near to bare feet as possible. So these shoes suited me really well. But then Nike switched to air, and I couldn't handle the air. I was not comfortable. I said to them, I can't run in these shoes. Obviously, I'm contractors. Like, how do we work this out? So they made me more American Eagles all through the rest of my time that I was with them. They kept making me American Eagles, and what they would do is make them in the colors of their latest one.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. At one point, though, when I was racing for New Zealand, anytime I was in a New Zealand team, they made them all in black and white. It was pretty cool. Cool.
You had many, many milestones. Of course, the Cascade, your running streak. What are any of these more high on the list of life changing. Gold medal at Commonwealth Games, certainly on the national level, is a high profile thing. What were the ones that you thought put you into the stratosphere? You were unbeatable there in the early '80s on the roads and so on. But were some of those races more key jettison type experiences?
I think the one that in the end that really meant the most when I crossed the finish line, where I could have retired and said, you know what, I made it, was the gold medal race, because it was never going to get any better than that year, right?
Right, right, yeah.
World record, totally. So that year, I would say, is you're never going to, never, right? And I don't think anybody's ever done anything like that in terms of having a year like that, starting with a world record and finishing with a gold medal. So that year, that's where you make a decision that you know it possibly will never happen. And are you going to continue knowing that it was perfect? And so I did for another 9 years. When I look back, I think what I'm most proud of is the consistency I had. Because in the end, I won 75 road races out of 112 starts and finished in the top three 90% of the time. That's pretty consistent. As much as I can take credit for some of it, I give a great deal of credit to my coach. I think we were a great team. I didn't get greedy. I got offered a great deal of money to run more races. So I didn't get greedy. We would make out our plan every year, and I never deviated from it, from the races I told him when and where I was going to race. The other thing I think I was really smart about was that I wasn't American, so therefore Nike, as much as they were giving me a contract, I was now racing American women that were getting 3, 4, 5 times more than I was getting. So at one point, I negotiated a contract early on that I got bonuses for repeat wins and for course records. And so I started going back to the same races. I had 7 wins at the Cleveland 10K and 7 wins at Bloomsday and 6 wins at the Virginia 10 miler. And I'm breaking course records. And so I'm not only getting prize money from these events, but I'm now getting these bonuses because I've structured it that way, which helps John to coach me. So that's how I built my income.
Yeah, it's like the Ukrainian Sergei Bubka beating the
Oh,
Copan at eighth of an inch each time, and each time's a bonus. That's brilliant. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a big part of it because it wasn't on the scale that it is now that you can specialize and show up at a couple meets a year and have a lucrative career. What about going back and forth? What was your travel then to New Zealand and back to America for just life? When did you say, I'm staying in North America?
Through my years of competing, I always left the United States around November to avoid the winter here and also to be able to go back and be under John's tutelage for a few months. So I'd leave November, I'd come back to the United States in March. Also, New Zealand's administration, if you wanted to make a New Zealand team, you had to do your qualifying time on New Zealand soil. They wouldn't take anything I did in the United States. So I'd go back to New Zealand and run a full track season. I never got any time off. I was running all through circuit here, and then I had to go back there and race the New Zealand track season. And sometimes I'd have to run a solo 10K just to do the qualifying time, either for the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games. But it was nice to go back and see family and to the New Zealand summer. So that was not a burden. I retired in 92. I lived in Boise, Idaho at the time. I had always been someone, when I was back in New Zealand, I didn't like the staffing. I didn't like being known. It's just not my personality. I'm more naturally a shy person, if you can believe that. I just didn't like that side of it. And it was hard because I'd be out training and people would pull their cars up beside me with kids and they'd want the kids to have my autograph and I'm in the middle of a training run or going to the supermarket. So I decided to stay in Boise At that point, Boise and Idaho did not have any big road race. I got asked, would I help build a big road race in Boise, Idaho? So in 1993, I founded a big women's event, 5K, in Boise, Idaho, and I filed for American citizenship. Oh, that's another story. Going through to get, get a green card here? 9 years. No one of these people want to come into the United States. I mean, 9 years.
So we'll talk about the race and its longevity. Now it's a significant, long-running race for women.
In 93, I founded a 5K for women for all ages, shapes, sizes, and abilities, because I realized in the races that women were only making up about 15% of the masses in these big road races. And I wanted to encourage women to come out and run road races. So I chose a 5K. My whole motto was, if you can do a 5K and realize you can do it and enjoy it and so forth, and we'll create a big party for you and so forth. That's why I began it. In 6 years, it grew to 17,000 women, the largest event for women in the United States. But then I had divorced and I got remarried in 97, and my husband's hometown is where I am now, which is Evansville, Indiana. So I'm leading this big event out in Idaho and commuting back and forth to Indiana. So on the 10th anniversary, I said, I can't do this anymore. And I went to the big major hospital in Boise and said, would you like to put your name on an event and take my staff? It was a nonprofit. So it was a nonprofit going to a nonprofit, and take my staff and keep this event going. And I'll still be involved, but I won't be heading it up. So they did that to their credit. It went for 20 years as a women's only race. But in that 20 years, women had now got to be over 50% of road racing. So that race wasn't exactly needed as much anymore, and it was down to 8,000 participants, which is still pretty big. Sponsors were starting to say, okay, it's not what it was, and what do you have to do? So we sat down and we turned it into a big community event, a 5K, 10K, and half marathon for everybody. And of course, it went through its COVID years, but it still exists, and it's back up to about 14,000.
Wow. Wow. Now, congratulations on that. That's a great effort. I wanted to ask you about your speaking and motivation and working with kids. You had to leave behind your teaching career where you worked with kids day in, day out. Then your women's race where you could reach out to women and try to have an impact there. And you, of course, do a lot of speaking. What I want to ask is, as you mentioned, your desire to get away from the celebrity treatment that you get from the public, but you're in multiple halls of fame, OBE, you've gotten all the honors there are to get, and being it from 2 different countries, you're in 3 different Hall of Fames. How do you prepare for those events to speak at them? And what are the messages when you speak at those that you try to get through?
I think I use my story for life lesson. I actually never speak about how fast I could run or about diet or training or anything like that. It's always about overcoming things and what it took for me to do the steps that I took. In that respect, with the kids, it's different. You have to tailor it to the kids, but that's where the teaching expertise comes in. As with Nike, they often ask, what are you going to do with regard to the community? And I always said, I want to go into school. Wherever I go and race, you tell the race director, put me in the schools. But that's what I did all through the time I was competing. I've done keynotes, and I just love the kid. So if you would ask what I love the most, it's getting into the school. A lot of that kind of calmed down because of COVID, because you couldn't travel. I'll turn 69 this year. Part of me at that point really realized that I was quite happy being a homebody. So I haven't actually done a great deal in the last few years. My husband hasn't retired yet, so it's take care of him, get him through to retirement, and I'm really quite happy. I'll do a few things locally. I've just been invited back to the 50th anniversary of the Virginia 10 miler, which will happen in September. Up until a year ago, I still held that course record.
Wow.
Yeah. Things like that, where you still get invited back. A lot of these major races are going to start to turn 50 in the next few years, whether you'll get invited to more of them. But that's pretty much it. I was on the board of directors of Running USA for 6 years. I think I've done my time in terms of that respect. And so now it's really doing what I want to do.
How long was the process of writing your book?
It was just first winter I was married here. And so it was my first winter in the United States. And I sat down and I kept diaries all through my running. And even though they were running diaries, they also had a lot of what was going on. Not all the soppy stuff, but in terms of I went here and I traveled here and here are my teammates and so forth. I went through all my diaries and I wrote notes. And then I told my whole story on tape and got it transcribed. And it's when John Parker took over and fine-tuned it. So that's why you really hear my voice throughout the whole thing, is because I spoke it, told it all, and then got it transcribed, and he fine-tuned it.
Did you meet John Parker way back with the Galloways and Atlanta?
No, I met John Parker when I was retired. And
Oh,
Nike sent me to running camps in North Carolina, and he was connected to the running camp.
okay.
I pretty much met him over a few beers
Yeah.
at a running
Mm.
camp in North Carolina.
Do you know Paul Chrisman, another author?
Yes,
Yeah.
he and Lorraine Moller dated for a while, and he came down to New Zealand a few times. Yes.
What about your OBE award? How did that fit into your psyche? And
It's actually the MBE.
oh, MBE, yeah.
It's the MBE. That came about in, let me think, 95. And it's awarded for people who have contributed to what their spot is in life worldwide. So it was to do with having contributed to athletics worldwide, which obviously is the stand for professionalism. So not just for your performances, it's that you've gone beyond that and made a contribution. So that's why you get that. So that was pretty cool. And in New Zealand, you don't have individual sports hall of fames. You have the National Sports Hall of Fame. So it's very difficult to get into, and only 2 sport people, a male and a female, put in each year. And you've got to get 90% of the votes. So that one is very unique to get into. The other 2 here are the Running USA Hall of Fame and the Roadrunners Club of America Hall of Fame. And then last year, I got inducted into the Museum of World Athletics in Monaco.
Oh, yeah. So it might not be the last one.
That's enough. But yeah, that one was pretty cool because you've got to give up some of your memorabilia. So I gave my Peachtree trophy and race number from when I won Peachtree, because worldwide they know the Peachtree Road Race. It was a really cool trophy. It really was. But you got to start giving up things. You can't take them with you. Then I gave a set of my custom-made Nike shoes. So that's what's in the World Athletics Museum.
Do you feel like a Kiwi? Do you feel like an American?
I'm still a Kiwi girl. I didn't do it because New Zealand's a lousy country. I wasn't leaving somewhere because I hated it. So my husband and I get to go back every year, and I honestly miss it. And there's a lot to miss. It's just a beautiful country, and I miss what I grew up with, all those beaches and the forests and the natural, all that. It's just glorious. So in that respect, I do miss it. I don't have a lot of family left, but I miss all that. Now, that said, I wouldn't be who I was if I hadn't come here. So you're in 2 different situations. And right now, with regards to the United States, it's not the same country I came to 40 years ago. There's that concern. So therefore, it's just nice to have that other passport.
Yeah. The journey you had as an adopted child and tracking down your birth parents, how much of a struggle was that to find them and reconnect with them?
I was told as soon as my adopted parents could tell me that I was adopted. And my dad was just wonderful, and that you're my daughter, and it's really special because I got to choose you, and which wasn't exactly correct, but it was a nice story that he told. So I never had any issue with being adopted. The only time I had to deal with it was that my younger sister is my adopted parents' natural daughter, and she was extremely premature in 1959, and mum and her almost died. She struggled. And so going to school, there were always the kids that found out I was adopted and would tease her about the fact, you don't have a sister. She's not your sister. Very cruel in that respect. But mum and dad were just great adopted parents. I had no issues whatsoever, very happy. I was about 32 years old, and the New Zealand so-called social services opened it up where an adoptive child and a birth mother could go looking for each other. If you didn't want to be found, you could veto your information for 10 years. And Dad saw the brochure in a local pharmacy store and brought it home to me. Now, Mum wasn't so outgoing about telling everybody I was adopted. Dad would do it. Dad was just proud. Mum, as far as she was concerned, people don't need to know. So Dad found it, and Dad didn't tell Mom. Dad came to me and said, read this, and if you want my help, I'll help you. I thought about it for a while, and I thought, you know what? New Zealand is a small country. I'm very famous. Somewhere there's a woman that needs to know how I turned out. So that was my motivation. So we start looking, and it's quite a search. These folks help you go through it. So you look up for your original birth certificate. So I have one birth certificate that I'm Anne Frances Garrett, and my parents are Ivan and Belle Garrett, and so that's my adopted parents. That's my birth certificate. But apparently there's an original birth certificate.
Oh,
And so you start looking for that, and they find a birth certificate for me, and I'm Eileen Maria Butler, born to Margaret Ann Butler in 1955. Her mother is Olive Ann Butler, and my parents named me Anne, and they didn't know a thing.
yeah.
How about that? I go, Dad, did you know? Dad goes, no, I had no idea. It's like, where did the name Anne come from? Anyway, so
Your birth mother and father were married then, right?
they weren't married when I was born.
No, but they get married?
Yes, they got married a year after I was born. And he was 10 years older than her. He got the farmer's daughter pregnant. On the birth certificate, all it had was Father European. It didn't have his name. It just had my birth mother's name. So then they say, okay, you got to try and find a marriage certificate for her. So they start saying, all right, let's find a marriage certificate. Heck, a year later, there's a marriage certificate, and it says she's married a Johann Ustuk. And I'm thinking, well, that's got to be my father, because it says he was European on the first thing, and it's 1 year later, and he's 27 and she's 17, and so you start putting it all together. They got married. So then they say, all right, you're going to try and find them. Ustuk's not a very common name in New Zealand. We couldn't find them anywhere. So they say, we got to look for the voting record. They'd never voted. Couldn't find them. And so then they say, all right, we're going to go backwards now. Let's start trying to track your grandparents. His, of course, are in Holland, because he'd immigrated to New Zealand from Holland and from the Netherlands. And so there's no record of, he's just come on his own. So there's no family on his side in New Zealand. So we start looking for her parents, and we find an Olive Ann Butler, and she's elderly, and she's living in a little area of New Zealand. At that point, a great American runner, John Sinclair, who was coached by my coach, John Davies, he was reading a book about the famous New Zealand athlete, Jack Lovelock. And so he's going through this. He's down in New Zealand staying with us while I'm going through all this. We're trying to keep it separate from my mom and not tell anybody what I'm doing. And the only folks who know what I'm doing is my coach and my dad and my ex-husband. We're trying to keep it quiet. And John's reading this book. And then we find out that my grandmother is Olive Ann Butler. And he's going, honey, Jack Lovelock's mother was Olive Ann Butler. You got to be related to Jack Lovelock. And so there's all this craziness. Really?
Oh, gosh.
I know. So we're going, oh no, this is just getting crazier. So we put through a phone call to this lady, and do you have a daughter called Margaret Ann? She goes, no, I don't. No. Put the phone down. Wait a little bit, knowing that she's elderly. Do you have a daughter called Margaret Ann Butler? No, I don't. And was like, this is her, but she's denying she's got a daughter. So something's going on. So we waited a little bit longer and tried again. And she got angry the third time. And she just said, yes, I do. And she's married to a Dutchman and she's living in Cambridge. It turned out that they hadn't had a very good relationship after. It was her that had forced my birth mum to give me up for adoption. So she was denying she even had a daughter. So we find them and we put through the phone call, and my birth mother picks up, and it's my ex-husband doing the talking, but I'm sitting right there. And he said, are you Margaret Ann Butler? And she says, yes. And he said, did you have a baby girl when you were young? And she says, oh, you mean Anne Francis? Is she still alive? And he says, how do you know her name? But she thought the Francis was my surname. So she
Right.
was looking and had only got that far and had given up because she thought Francis was my surname. And he said, oh, yes, she's very much alive and she's my wife. And she said, oh, I've been looking for that baby ever since I gave her up. And he said, there's something else I need to tell you. He said, have you heard of the runner, Anne Audain? Oh, of course. Yes, of course. And my husband follows her. And she goes, no. He goes, yep. And then she says, she's got 6 brothers and sisters. Yeah. How about that for a story? I went from looking for a birth mother to finding an entire intact family with 6 younger brothers and sisters. And when we finally met them, one of the first things she said was, you wouldn't have been who you were if you'd stayed with us. And she's exactly right. So we see them every time I go back to New Zealand. We have a big get together. Of course, there's lots of nephews and nieces and great nephews and nieces, and they're a lovely family, farming family, rural family, just great soul of the earth people. Just
That's
really
great.
nice. And yeah, so yes, I'm the oldest of 7, but I never got to be the oldest.
Well, it's a great story. You've been through such a long, twisting career of choices, ups and downs, leaving the sport and getting back in to go on to do even more great things. How much of a fan are you now?
I think a lot of us that were blessed with getting through the 80s of the road racing, I think we all say it was the best decade, because now if I was to look back at that one perfect year and the prize money, how much money I earned that particular year, which in 1982 was 6 figures. First of all, a lot of those races don't exist anymore. Those that do either had the same amount of money or less. Cascade closed down. So the race that started it all, they didn't manage to keep it going. The shoe companies don't give out, the contracts like they did, because they don't need the runners anymore, the elites anymore, because they've built the road races. The road race directors don't need the elites anymore because they've got 30, 40,000 people taking place. In the 80s, we were all used to build those races. It was just great. We worked hard. We had to sit at the expos for hours. We had to sign posters and we had to attend the prize giving. We couldn't fly in at the last moment and leave immediately after the race. You had to spend about 3 or 4 days in the city. And so we gave as much as they gave us, and we built those races. And now they exist and they're wonderful, and the participation level is wonderful. But I'll say, and I can get criticized for it, there's no young athlete of 25 years of age that can come to the United States now like I did and have a career in road racing. Doesn't exist.
Yeah. Now, the timing makes it, the choices you have to make, and the very narrow path to choose. And it seems like a decision made at that point in life is really hard to make the right one, even if it's made with the best information in mind. The idea of getting it right is much harder.
Yes, I love watching them. And then, of course, on the other side, I love watching the All Blacks, the rugby. I just love watching that. So I switch back and forth, and make no apology for it. I'm a fan of all sports. So that's actually not really got anything to do with nationality. I just love watching the best.
And the group of people that came up with you starting in the early 70s, now in post-running career, do you stay in touch with those people?
If we wanted
Uh-huh.
to say there was one great thing about Facebook, is that we're all in touch in that respect. So we're all seeing each other's lives and our kids and now our grandkids and where everybody is. That's for all the athletes that I was connected to. We're all friends on Facebook. And pretty much all my Facebook friends are anything to do with running all over the world. That's wonderful. The gals I competed against, and you really just need to see pictures and you know what's going on in their life. And that's pretty cool. So I'll give Facebook a positive on that aspect. Not great. And as I said, I feel very fortunate. I had the 70s in that capacity with New Zealand's great era. And then I had the 80s. And it's been great. You can't, look back on it and you just go, yep, this was a blast.
Thank you so much for your time, Anne. Thank you so
All right.
much, Anne.
You take
Bye-bye.
care. All right.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.